Wait.
Is that okay?
Yeah. Go.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first webinar held by IPIM and also our consultancy company, Suno Marketing Limited, in 2025. So the theme of today is how to strive in 2025. It's all about the international networking and the marketing. So at first, our management director, Elaine Wong, will deliver a speech to all of you, and then Patrick and Porrick will have the comment. Yes.
Hi, all fans, good afternoon. Thank you for joining 2025, the first training webinar to date. As you know, nowadays the world situation is complex and even changing. We need to update and also upgrade ourselves every day. Today, we are honored to have Patrick and Porrick as our keynote speakers again. They will share their valuable insights and expertise to us. Looking ahead to 2025, IPIM will continue to organize more international recognized trainings to enhance our skills in the MICE industries. And also we will have trade shows and roadshows to provide valuable opportunities for networking and cooperations for our partners. Finally, before I pass the floor to Patrick, I would like to wish all of you have a great Lunar New Year. 恭喜發財，身體健康，心想事成，恭喜大家。Thank you, Patrick and Porrick.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Elaine, and it's wonderful to be back. Good afternoon to all our friends in Macau, and a special welcome to the university, to the Macau University of Tourism, who are joining us for the first time with their professor. You're very welcome, and we hope that you have lots of questions for us to answer. So thank you again for being part of this webinar. My name is Porrick Gilligan, and I'm delighted to welcome you to another deep dive into the business events industry, brought to you by our friends and our colleagues at IPIM. So thanks, Gonzalo, for the intro, and thanks to Elaine as well. As we approach 2025, the business events industry continues to face transformative shifts. This exclusive webinar has been designed for business events professionals and students in Macau, and will explore emerging trends, actionable strategies, and insights to thrive in the year ahead. So how to thrive in 25, that's what we want to actually focus on. Sydney Nolan, who's a key figure on the Sulnua research team, will present her findings on the top trends shaping the industry in 2025, with a particular focus on the APAC region. And then my great colleague Patrick Delaney will take the reins and moderate a wide-ranging discussion with me and Sydney on how to thrive in 25. So Sydney, shall we jump right in? What trends are you calling out for 2025?
Let's do it. Thank you very much for having me on today's webinar. Grania, if you don't mind in the back end, just enabling sharing, I'll post some slides up here shortly. I think one of the things that I really like to do in my role at Sulnua is to read and review a lot of different sources from all over the world, from all different kinds of organizations. So what you'll see here is a couple of different select graphs or charts or sets of data that I've found from a couple of different reports that I think have been really interesting or offer something really insightful. And we'll kind of go through and talk about what some of these kind of macro trends show or suggest for 2025. And then I think get into a great discussion with Patrick and Porrick. So without further ado, I will jump in here. Give me 1 second here. Sorry about this, folks. Okay. Yeah, I'm having issue getting the slides up here. Let me see here.
Well, Porrick, we know one thing is going to be the same in 2025 is there always will be challenges with technology, no matter how well we prepare.
Technology will always be the enabler and also the disabler.
Exactly, which is
Particularly
fantastic.
when we kind of rely on it the most, because we can always be sure that somewhere along the line there will be something that prevents it from doing what it has been planned to do. But we'll get there in a few minutes, and even if we don't have a slide, Sydney, I think we can probably talk through the points, or perhaps at least if you can see the slides, you can give us your insights.
As I say, I think Grania might be trying to work some back-end magic here for us, but I will jump in and go ahead and get started at least with a couple of points. So hopefully you all got a chance to see the webinar booklet that was sent to participants in advance. But there's kind of four main areas that we were hoping to look at and talk through today, and that we'll talk through as a panel as well later today. But the first one that we wanted to talk about was emerging technologies. And I think the kind of big, obvious solution that you think of when you think of emerging technology is AI. AI has been everywhere in 2024, and I think you'd be hard-pressed to find an expert in any source, any field, any profession that doesn't think that that interest and that buzz around AI will really continue into 2025. I think what's interesting is if you kind of look at what industries are talking about AI, it's really not just limited to your tech companies. So it's not just companies like OpenAI or Anthropic or Google or these companies that are kind of creating and providing these AI algorithms that the world is becoming increasingly familiar with. But it's industries like healthcare or like, agriculture or retail, kind of anywhere, everywhere that we, if you look at the data, the topic of AI is coming up on research reports, on earnings calls, kind of all over, all different mediums and formats. So I think for MICE, that indicates a really interesting opportunity for the likes of Macao and for all of the kind of MICE partners that are on here today to think about how AI might be relevant in something like the association space, for example. I think it's really important to start thinking about, if you're not already, how to recruit ambassadors and speakers that are comfortable with and well-versed in being able to talk about and discuss AI with your meeting participants, because it's increasingly important across all fields. I think when you look at sort of the tech stack and how AI companies operate, you've got the kind of really shiny, fun tools like ChatGPT or like Claude, or you've got these different models as well. But there's also a lot of different parts and pieces that make that up, right? I think NVIDIA is a big company that gets a lot of global buzz. They're the ones that make the actual physical chips that power a lot of these AI solutions. And there's all kinds of different hardware and software manufacturers out there too that are part of this wider AI ecosystem. So again, when you're thinking about, well, who are we going to target as our key MICE clientele or as our key potential MICE clients, I'd really be making sure that the kind of Asia Pacific or APAC offices of all those different parts of the value chain are on your prospecting list. It's not just these tech companies that are having really big, buzzy sales kickoffs or meetings, but it's also, if you want to go to slide 3 here, Bork, that'll get us right back on track. Thank you so much. You can kind of see there, that's that tech stack that I'm talking about. If you've got your applications, the shiny fun things everyone knows, you've got your models, but you've also got what this source calls your picks and shovels, which is that hardware software piece that makes these AI solutions work. All of this is potential MICE business that you could be capturing on that corporate side. And if you want to go back just one quick slide, Pork. This just gives you a sense, again, as I was talking about too, when you think about the association sector, this shows you the broad range of different industries and sectors that are talking about AI. So AI is really an all-inclusive, all MICE topic right now. It's kind of our first takeaway. And you can now skip 2 slides, Pork. Okay, so we talked about emerging technology with kind of this first overarching topic still. I think we'd also be remiss if we didn't talk about the new kind of not the new, I guess, but the sort of changes that we're seeing in social media and in digital media as well. On the left, obviously, you have kind of big news that made headlines, at least in the US, of a company like Meta deciding to go back to what they say is more speech and fewer mistakes. So kind of changing the way their platforms work. And then, of course, the kind of other major buzz that captured global headlines just to start 2025. So we're only 22 days in, and these companies are already making massive headlines in terms of where they're taking their technology. But the idea of, is TikTok going to stay in a market like the US? Is it moving? That led to changes in different apps. So that screen grab you see on the right there were the most popular apps for both Android and Apple last week in the US. So I think what's interesting to note here is just that the future is really uncertain when it comes to these social media marketing tools. Kind of the downside of a lot of this is when you're on these platforms, the platforms get to make their own rules and really decide how people are going to show up and operate in their space. When you don't own that space, it's a lot harder to sort of decide your future in some ways. So I think the takeaway here for any MICE brands that are on the call today is to really think about kind of, one, do you have channels that you do have more control over, like a website, kind of platforms where you get to put your voice out the way you want it to go out. And the idea of, I think MICE overall is an industry that's maybe a bit reactive, not quite as sort of going to be the first movers as some other verticals might be. But that being said, it's important, I think, to keep an eye on your competitors, look at what platforms they're on, look at where they're showing up, and be ready to move kind of if and as you see changes happening in this space. I think this is very much a watch this space. We'll see what takes off. We'll see what gets big. And it's forever and always changing. So it's kind of the challenge, which can be fun, or the challenge that can be a struggle. Do you want to take us on? And then so the last one here, if we kind of talk about emerging technology, I think it's really important to think about how technology is affecting the way people are meeting as well. So one of the best data sources out there that I definitely look at every year is the Amex GBT 2025 Global Forecast. And something that came through really strongly in this year's report is this idea that people really want to meet in person. I think we've seen the appetite for that come roaring back ever since the pandemic sort of slowed down a bit. But if you look at here, it's nearly 60% of people who took this year's Amex GBT survey are saying that they're going to plan in-person events only and only rely on tech solutions for 20 or 21% of their other business. So again, I think this talks to like losing shifting attention spans, people kind of changing focus a little bit. Really good news for our industry in some ways, especially for a destination like Macao and for many of you, which are probably very eager to show off all that you can do as a destination and all that you can do as supplier partners. Go for this one, Pork. So that's kind of our first big area, was emerging technology. The second topic we wanted to touch on was sustainability and CSR. And I think, again, the kind of big, obvious headline that jumps out here is this idea of accelerating climate disasters. So closer to home for me in the US would be the wildfires that captured headlines, certainly at the start of this year again. But if you look kind of back at what made news in 2024, especially in the Asia Pacific region, you see a lot of extreme weather events. And that's just really the pattern you're seeing all around the world, whether it's floods, fires, typhoons, things happen. We know that. But I think these disasters the pace of disasters is certainly accelerating, and the kind of magnitude of it is certainly deepening as well. I think it's really interesting too that you kind of see, I just pulled some headlines that jumped out when you start kind of looking for this kind of news. It was interesting to me too to see that groups like the United Nations or the World Economic Forum, which is meeting this week in Davos, are looking at Asia Pacific specifically and are kind of questioning why that region is maybe especially prone to natural disasters. So definitely something I think to keep in mind. Again, from a MICE perspective, I think it's really important to know the risks and rewards of your destination. Industry data, so sources like the Incentive Travel Index, which is a global body of incentive research, different reports from groups like ICA, they're all definitely showing participant interest and participants kind of talking about the importance of being able to source destinations that are either prepared for these kinds of climate disasters, or at least thinking about them and kind of looking to sort of mitigate by pursuing destinations that are maybe at less risk. So I think, knowing that kind of a big topic in sustainability is this idea of climate disaster. It's only human nature to want to control what we can control. So I think you're seeing in response to some of these severe weather events, you're seeing more countries, more states, more destinations try and put laws in place to sort of mitigate the impacts or sort of kind of put boundaries around more sustainability forward or CSR friendly practices. So again, I've pulled just a few examples here. A big one that comes into play this year would be the EU CSRD. That's essentially a piece of legislation where companies of a certain size in Europe or foreign companies that have a European subsidiary of a certain size are going to have to start following a standard form of reporting on all kinds of sustainability metrics. They'll have to report out what are called Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions. So it's pretty substantive reporting. California in the US has a very similar law in place where it's again focused on reporting. And you're even starting to see these kinds of laws come into place in source markets like the UAE, which has legislation coming into play later this year. I think these are good to know about on the client side when we think about why it's relevant for MICE. It's certainly important to think through or think about what you might need to help clients report out on if they're putting a meeting or event or incentive in Macau. Or in the case of like the UAE law, I think what's really interesting, kind of another aside or another piece of this here, is that this kind of legislation might impact things like airlines that are headquartered in a destination. And these groups might now need to think about, well, what kind of routes can we run? How far can we really go if we need to think about and be mindful of our emissions? So again, when we think sustainability, certainly good to think about the kind of legislative side and be prepared to either advocate for certain policies and kind of use your voice, use your position to really champion policies that are going to be friendly and helpful to you all as businesses, but also be prepared for that bite back as well, and be prepared for legislation that might make it harder to do business with certain partners or in certain regions. So that's our second topic, sustainability. Our third topic that we wanted to cover off here before we jump into discussion is this idea of a diversifying attendee base. So we've really zoned in on India here, just as one example. The screen grab that you see on screen, the little orange box shows you kind of the growth in what they call the consumer class relevant to India. So consumer class is basically a metric of who has kind of budgetary dollars to either spend on leisure travel or kind of pump back into things like business travel, personal development, personal growth, professional growth. So the kinds of funding that would support MICE activity. So you can see here that India is just above and beyond in terms of its economic activity. But that's also not to discount other countries and other players that are on this chart. Indonesia's on there, Vietnam is on there. Bangladesh is on there, Turkey, Thailand. So a lot of really interesting markets that hopefully definitely should be on Macau's MICE radar. Go ahead and flip to the next one. So again, if we kind of stick with India as a case example here, and we kind of think through, okay, if India is really growing in terms of its kind of consumer class, consumer base, what might that mean for the MICE space? I again just pulled two headlines, two examples that I thought were really interesting. The one on the right here talks about how an incentive group came to Vietnam and was really looking for kind of local cuisine, local flavors as part of their experience in that country, even though they were in a destination with really rich food cuisine and kind of food traditions of its own. That group of tourists is still looking for kind of local familiar flavors. We think, we know, I guess, that this is something Macau can actually do really well, just based on kind of your own infrastructure and your own huge mix of different kind of cultures and traditions that you all very proudly celebrate in your destination. But the example on the left is actually one from Belfast, which hosted a 2023 meeting from a Tata Motors subsidiary. And they did something really interesting with their menu when they were putting together this meeting for hundreds of Indian delegates, where they worked with a local chef, a local Indian chef based in Belfast, to figure out how to kind of bring in that sort of local flair, local familiarity and flavors and tastes that their Indian delegates would be familiar with, but still use local produce, still use kind of local or traditional cooking methods, and really find a way to bridge those two cultures and bring those two different sensibilities together. So really interesting approach, a good way to kind of, think about literally how to cater for what your meeting guests are going to need or want, but also still stay true to your local roots. And, we're kind of using food as an example. And, kind of laughing a bit at it since it can seem like a small detail, but I think it speaks to the need too of really making sure that you're dialed in on what customs and cultural expectations your MICE guests are going to have as the world continues to get bigger and as people who attend our meetings and attend our events really truly do diversify. I think last one in this here just kind of looks at, again, if we think about, there's all different kinds of ways that you can measure how much the world is changing or how much our attendee base truly is diversifying. One other interesting point that I just want to look at really quickly is this idea of women continuing to advance in their sort of professional education. So this just looks at a few different countries that, again, kind of if you compare the percentage of men versus women earning university degrees, and women are continuing to outpace men now in many, many countries. This has been linked to a whole range of different effects or kind of results as a result of or more women becoming educated. But I think, again, it's a reminder for us that, one, the gender makeup of your meetings is likely to kind of continue balancing out and continue changing as well as more women step into these professional roles. And it's likely a good reminder for ourselves as well that when we're hiring and that when we're looking at how to build our own workforces and teams and how to recruit a really talented MICE team for ourselves, that we're thinking about gender diversity too. So I think that's the last point in this section. And then our fourth and final topic here, before I turn it back over to Pork and Patrick for a discussion about some of this, is the idea of new marketing strategies. So looking at how are we getting the message out about what makes Macao a great MICE destination. I'm focusing here mostly on just one part of the MICE acronym, just to kind of illustrate a couple of points here. So we're going to look at data from the Incentive Travel Index. The Incentive Travel Index is a global study that focuses on the I in MICE, the incentive travel piece of things. And I think what it really helps us illustrate is the importance for Macao of having both a long-haul marketing strategy and a short-haul marketing strategy. So what I mean by that is that when I talk about a short-haul marketing strategy, I'm talking about attracting incentive programs or any part of MICE business from kind of countries and destinations that would be close to Macao. I think, again, if we look at just the Incentive Travel Index as one small piece of data that kind of gives us an idea of what this short-haul market looks like, there was definitely increased interest this year in people looking for incentive destinations that are a shorter distance from where their company is based. So again, when you're thinking about who to market to and how to market, having that short-haul reach in place is going to be critically important for a destination like Macao, I think. But this is maybe the area where I'm going to hedge a little bit. I'm going to be kind of try and play both sides here, because I think Macao also needs to make sure, and Macao, when I say Macao, I mean kind of the destination and then all of the supplier partners that are in it. So the hotels that might be on the call today, the DMCs, kind of anyone who's tuning in and works in the MICE space or studies in the MICE space, as is the case for our university guests. It's critical to have a long-term marketing strategy top of mind as well. Long haul would mean, I think typically, Pork and Patrick, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's usually kind of 4 to 6 hours or more of travel time away from your home country or where your kind of most of your employees would be based. But if we again just stick with incentives as a very small piece, but a very lucrative piece of MICE business, that same study, that same Incentive Travel Index, showed that there is nearly about a quarter of participants who are looking for destinations that are a greater distance from their country of origin. That's what you see in that second highlighted yellow box there. And then there's also 70% of participants who are interested in using destinations that they have not used before for incentive travel. So if you're kind of looking at these greater haul distances that are new to you, these are really bucket list opportunities. I think, if you think about a bucket list incentive, this is really, again, the spend per head on incentives tends to be higher than other parts of MICE business. And I think there's a really, really kind of piqued interest here in terms of people looking to have an adventure that they have not had before. And that's a really exciting marketing area for Macao to start playing in. So I think, again, it's kind of that idea of how do you go for the short haul and you go for the kind of the easy, obvious business that is regionally close to you and will be easy for your MICE delegates to get to. And then how do you also keep in mind wanting to stand out as that long haul bucket list worthy destination? So it's coming up with that two-pronged marketing strategy that will kind of open you up to the world, if it will. This is my summary. I know that was a lot of information to cover in just a few minutes here. So this is maybe a good one to screen grab in terms of kind of the headlines that I see coming out in 2025. But Pork and Patrick, I'll open back up to both of you and let's maybe talk through some of this and help make sense of all those facts and figures that I just kind of put up on screen here.
Thanks, Sydney, for that very comprehensive and indeed exhaustive look at what might be affecting us in 25. Thanks so much. Just on the questions, just to remind everybody on our webinar that please, if you do have a question, put it in the chat and we'll certainly get to it or try our best to get to it. Porrick, can I start with yourself? You posted a blog at the beginning of the year, and Grania, you might just also, if you wouldn't mind, placing that blog in the chat. In the blog, you talked about how to thrive in 25 and whether there's going to be a turbulence or a transformation. And two alliteration as usual, two words beginning with T, but very different. What's it going to be? Is it going to be turbulence or transformation, or do you need one in order to achieve the second?
Yeah, actually, I think it's going to be both. I think, you know, turbulence is going to lead to transformation, and transformation equally is going to lead to turbulence, because you know, when we actually experience a massive change and a disruption, we obviously have a lot of coping to do, learning how to actually deal with that. So that kind of causes turbulence for us all. So I think it's probably kind of the two all the time. I was reminded though of another kind of, you know, way of looking at this, and that would be to talk about crisis, which could be linked with turbulence, and opportunity, which could be linked with transformation. And it might be a kind of it might be an easier way to present the situation that we find ourselves in. It is certainly an era of crisis. There's no doubt about that. But I think we've seen over the last kind of 20 years, over the last 2 decades, that with crisis comes great opportunity. And I think we will see that going forward as well. With the turbulence that's in our world at the moment from a geopolitical perspective, there will be transformation, and we need to ride the wave of that positive transformation in order to actually thrive in 25.
And can I just ask you on how we as partners in the MICE industry, is that crisis, the speed at which those crises or those opportunities are coming, is that something that's going to increase as well? Because already it's pretty fast.
I think so. I mean, you know, if we think of the, you know, what's happening in the current days, there's a new regime in the United States, and you know, there were a lot of I don't know how many executive orders were signed in the last kind of day, but if all of them will have an implication, all of them will cause turbulence, all of them will also cause transformation. And I think we need to draw on the resilience that we found in other moments of crisis. You know, the pandemic years were years of unprecedented turbulence, that did lead to opportunities. It did lead across the whole world of destination marketing, for example, to opportunities around resetting, looking at things with a different perspective, maybe starting again on certain things that really needed to be given that kind of different impetus. So yeah, there will be lots of change. There will be lots of turbulence. But I think we've demonstrated as an industry that we do have a resilient gene that tends to come to the fore in moments like this. And I think we need to rely on that now going forward.
Okay. Sydney, are you in agreement with Porrick, or do you have a feeling about which is a transformation or turbulence that's going to be the dominant feature?
You know, I think I'm going to follow Porrick's lead here and maybe change the frame just slightly, only because there was a line that I really liked that I read, I think just last week, actually, from Politico, that phrased it as, if 2024 was the year of the election and we saw so many leadership changes that I think are leading to this exact turbulence you just talked about, Porrick, then 2025 is going to be the year of the fallout. So they were a little more pessimistic than you were, maybe. But I liked that phrasing. But I think what that really made me think is when I kind of bring it back to a MICE context, I'm really going to, I think, be looking to industry associations to help us navigate turbulence and transformation. I think these are really the groups that often straddle a very global kind of spectrum of members. And I think we saw some really transformative behaviors during the pandemic and then out of it since. So I'm really curious to see how the likes of ICA, of PCMA, of SITE, kind of all those different, of UFI, all those different acronyms are really going to help us navigate what I agree I think will be both turbulence and hopefully some really exciting transformation out there too.
Okay, so very good, a very good suggestion and reminder of our need to be plugged into these sources of support that help us be resilient. And also, I suppose, Sydney, would you agree that it's critical for our attitude not to, we know the crisis is coming, so our attitude as regards planning, for that flexibility which is going to be required.
Definitely. Definitely.
Okay. Porrick, since Sydney mentioned she was going to agree with you, when is she going to agree with the next statement? Because I certainly was shocked. I mean, you used the phrase in your blog which said, "The old is dying, the new cannot be born." I mean, I know it's referenced, it's in your academic background in the Italian philosopher, but that's a very profound statement. Tell me, as a MICE practitioner, what relevance is that to me, and what were you thinking behind that statement?
Well, I suppose the statement was crafted in the 1920s, and I think if we look at what has been happening in the world in that kind of 100-year period, I think we would agree that the old is dying. We may not agree with the second part, which is the new cannot be born, because I think we are seeing now finally a massive proliferation of new things in terms of how we live as people, as a species on this planet. But that phrase is a phrase that I would use in conjunction with another one. Sydney had a great example of how we find inspiration in different sources, and one source for me is just reading in general and keeping in touch with news and following kind of what's happening online and following it in print and so on. And I read a great phrase that Pope Francis said last year, where he referred to, "This is not an epoch of change. It's a change of epoch." And I think that's a very, very powerful way of maybe explaining the Antonio Gramsci phrase as well. Civilization goes through different epochs. And I think what Pope Francis was putting his finger on was the fact that we are now entering a new epoch, and that epoch is one that's certainly kind of centered more on digital reality than on analog reality, and is powered by digital reality. It doesn't mean that face-to-face human interaction is not important. In fact, I think what we're all realizing is that the more digital we become, the more important that human connectivity is. And that's great news in relation to what we do as an industry, because we bring people together in real time, in real places. So I think, we are living in extremely turbulent, transformative years. And, in 100 years' time, like looking back at the phrase that I quoted, you can see how the truth of that phrase does emerge over many decades. I think when we look back 100 years from now at what's happening at the moment, we will see that this is the change of an epoch, and we will be more advanced into that kind of new epoch and have a greater kind of comfort perhaps with the new ways that we actually connect with each other and live with each other.
Interesting, Porrick. And would you agree, in this time of change, again, I'm picturing myself as a hotelier or as a DMC, as somebody who's providing services, and with all of this change going on, the need to keep the basic standards, that really central emphasis on service of customer. So the next shiny opportunity is there, but we need always to make sure that we keep those basic standards that are the fundamental bedrock of delivering a successful MICE event. Actually, you did remind me, well, this could turn out to be a Pope Francis propaganda show nearly, because I'm thinking about a phrase that he used as well, which he said the three most important words in business are please, thank you, and sorry. So in the midst of all of this technology, to keep our basics right. Sydney, very philosophical conversation there going on. What about yourself? What's your feeling here now in terms of this new order, and how do we navigate it so that Macao as a destination is able to maximize all of the pluses and minimize all of the potential pitfalls?
Feeling like I needed to add a philosophy class to my undergrad
Absolutely.
course mix, first of all. So not as deep as Porrick, unfortunately, but I think, I do think, or I would agree, I guess, that history does tend to be cyclical in some ways. I think history does repeat itself. Whatever the line is about those who don't learn the lessons of history are kind of doomed to repeat them. I don't know if it's so much doomed to repeat them, but I think we have a really interesting opportunity or moment in time right now to really kind of lean into the political moment, the energy that we're in, and really look at regions like Asia Pacific, destinations like Macao, sort of, your neighbors in the region. And I think really broaden our understanding of what hospitality looks like, what hospitality means, how to really build that out in a MICE context. So I think, we look at economies like the BRICS economies, which are certainly, asserting and reasserting their dominance. I think maybe sometimes to a degree that the West maybe sleeps on a little bit. I think it just doesn't get the coverage or the attention or the energy that, there's some really exciting activity and innovation and development happening in this part of the world. So I think it's really about kind of maybe thinking back to the idea of marketing strategies. How are you being strategic and smart and welcoming and warm and getting that message out there, but being really proud of what's happening in your region and in your destination, and making sure that you're finding the right avenues to tell those stories. In the MICE world, that's likely at trade shows like IMEX. It's in media advertorials. It's just in connecting face to face with people. And I think the more meetings and connections we make, the more we help really kind of tell this story and showcase this idea that there's more than one way to be hospitable, and that there's certainly really interesting, exciting, different things happening in different parts of the world and that are well worth speaking and shouting about. So kind of a meandering answer there a little bit, but
no, very good, Sydney. Sydney, and can I ask you a very basic question? Because I know we've certainly some students present, and I'm always fascinated and perplexed by the number of acronyms in our industry. But you use the phrase BRICS, in terms of what countries, what markets are we talking about there? What are those countries?
oh gosh, Pat, you're really pulling out a pop quiz on me here today.
Yeah.
I think if I'm remembering correctly, BRICS started as a group of about 5 or 6 economies, and BRICS would be Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. I believe it was last year, it was either 23 or 24, that they expanded membership to include, I think, more South American countries and a couple of African countries as well. Kind of, maybe I want to say, was it Nigeria, I think, is in there now. So kind of, again, when we think about
Egypt,
okay,
Egypt, but also, and I think kind of probably
now?
one of the fastest growing economies is Indonesia, which I think is particularly interesting for Macao because it's nearby.
Yeah, and you did mention that, Sydney, and I absolutely agree with you, is that, one of the features of association business at the moment, of all business ventures, is to look first to the short term, short haul markets, although we need, as you rightly said, you cannot ignore the long haul, but that regionalization of association meetings is very much a feature, and definitely one which is something that needs to be taken into account. Sydney, you mentioned it, and I'm going to put Porrick on the spot now, give you a rest, because AI, I mean, if I look at any magazine, if I listen to any webinar, if I go to any meeting, AI is there. And I'm expecting to get it with my cereal. AI has been added to cereal. It's the only thing that AI hasn't appeared. So, again, great. It's everybody knows what it is, but do we? Do I? I have to say I don't. It means it's quite academic for me in many ways. So Porrick, again, knowing that I'm a practitioner in Macao, what does give me some examples of how associations, businesses are using AI?
Yeah, it's in many respects, AI came to prominence, I think, in 2022 because of one thing, because of ChatGPT.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, it could write better than we could write ourselves, and we could see very tangibly how AI would make a massive difference. But it's been around, obviously, for an awful lot longer, and it's been part of our lives for quite some time. Through the different social media channels that we might actually look at, we know that AI makes the choice of the posts and the feeds that we actually receive. It's driving the different streaming services that we use as well. So if we listen to Spotify, Spotify is selecting other music that we might like based on what we're listening using AI. So it's been around for a long time. But I think what we're seeing now is a real practical application of AI in terms of the day-to-day operations of a conference or a meeting or an incentive travel program. So, yeah, I knew you were going to ask me this question, Pat, so I'm ready for you.
Good. Love to hear that.
And I have a list. But I do have to pay tribute to Nitin Sachida, who is the current site president and has been leading an AI kind of lobby for many years within the industry, and he has spoken many times on AI. And so I'm going to give you his list of the different things that you should have access to if you are in our industry, starting with research. So let's say you're researching a conference or an event, and you want to try and understand whether or not it has the potential to come to Macau. Well, obviously you can use the ICA database for that, or you can use an AI tool, which is also accessing the ICA database, and that's called Perplexity. So that's one thing I would recommend very highly. Perplexity will give you the source, the specific source of any data point that it actually serves to you. So it's not necessarily hallucinating the way that ChatGPT can sometimes provide you with a wonderful response, but it may not be true. Perplexity will give you the source of the different data points. From a PowerPoint perspective, and I found this one really useful, there's an AI tool called Gamma, and it will basically design a PowerPoint presentation for you as well as a graphic designer could do it. You obviously, with all of these things, it's the prompting and it's the direction that you give to the tool at the beginning that helps the tool deliver what you want. So the clearer you are in terms of your direction, the better the output. But Gamma is a really good way of doing a very impressive PowerPoint presentation without being a graphic designer. Often, particularly in the world of associations and the running of conferences and so on, we sit at committee meetings with host committees or with scientific committees, and we need to be able to take very meticulous notes of what's going on. So for that, Nitin recommends Sybil, Sybill, or Xembly, Xembly. There are many others. Many of you are probably already using them. There's an AI tool that goes with Zoom that will basically transcribe everything that we're saying here and deliver to you afterwards. So again, that's a very, very good note-taking thing. You can then take the notes, you can put them into ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT to summarize it for you. So again, like lots of really useful things around the note-taking. For events in general, PCMA have developed an AI tool called Spark. So that definitely should be looked at, particularly in the light of the different tools that it provides in terms of how you actually would run an event, how you handle registrations, all of those kind of things. Spark will help you with that. And then when it comes to generative AI, so let's say you're responding to an RFP, you're doing a bid book for a conference. For those, you need generative AI. The market leader at the moment on our side of the world is certainly ChatGPT from OpenAI. But Gemini, which is the Google version, is also excellent. And then Sydney mentioned earlier on, and Sydney will chime in here too. She's a bit of an expert on this whole kind of area of AI, particularly in how it kind of applies to meetings and events. But Claude is another good one in relation to a generative AI tool. So there's the list: Perplexity, Gamma, Xembly and Sybil for note-taking, Spark for events, ChatGPT, Gemini, and Claude AI for generative.
Super, Pork, very comprehensive, and thank you to Nitin as well, and thank you to Grania, who's kindly put a written version of all of those, the names of all of those programs that Pork mentioned. Indeed, Sydney, I've had the pleasure of sitting through two of your presentations, your excellent presentations. What's resonating when you actually use these programs? What resonated with the audience in your experience? Where should I start?
I think what was interesting for me in 2024 talking about AI is I really saw a shift throughout the year of, when we kind of started the year last year, I think people were sort of not quite sure where to start or not sure if they wanted to make AI really part of their working habits or their kind of daily work. Versus I think you kind of went through the year, and by the end of the year, I think we generally saw the MICE industry maybe still be a little bit uncertain about what tools to use exactly, or kind of, have a really, really go-to routine down. But I think we saw maybe more openness and more acceptance of AI is here. We're going to use it. We're still maybe just not quite sure how. I think Pork gave you a great list of different solutions and platforms that are out there. So I'd back that list. I think Spark is certainly one that's really interesting and has a lot of event-specific functions. It's also, to Pork's point about these tools are really only as good as the prompts you give them. Spark has a lot of built-in prompts where it really walks you through how to do each step of what it is you're trying to have an AI assistant help you with. So if you've never touched an AI tool before, I think that's a really easy one to start with. I'd say Claude also has, I personally, I really like Anthropic's Claude. I think it's an interesting company. I also really like, if you go on their website, they have a whole library of different prompts that you can give it. So if you're looking for ideas or examples of how exactly you might be able to use one of these tools, even if you're not going to run your query or your search through Claude, that library is a really interesting resource, and I can try and dig it up once I'm done talking here and stick it in the chat. But I think that the kind of advice that I keep coming back to for event professionals when we talk about AI is to also just think about and be mindful, kind of to what Pork started his kind of discussion with, of where AI exists in tools that you're already using. So a lot of events, for example, at least in this part of the world, would use a solution like Cvent to manage registration or a room block or whatever you might, there's a million different things you can do with Cvent. Cvent, like, again, virtually every tech company out there has put a lot of thought and idea and work behind integrating AI features into their product already. We've seen LinkedIn do the same. If you go on LinkedIn and you write something, There's all kinds of AI tools built in. A lot of email software does it. Zoom does it. So I think that, again, if you're kind of maybe not quite sure where to start, or you're just looking to make AI more of a daily habit, think of, be mindful, and start embracing where AI is already built into tools that you already have access to, I think. I will say too, the one thing that I'm not seeing buzz about yet, but I'm kind of curious to see if it will come into the conversation around AI this year, is the sustainability impact of AI. So I think you're starting to see a little bit of general chatter about it. But I think we do also need to be mindful as an industry that is pretty carbon intensive and can be carbon heavy with the amount of travel that's involved in events. AI is also, it uses a ton of water to run a search query. There's energy usage to be mindful of. So I think it's also just be making sure that we're using these tools and these resources responsibly, and maybe keeping just a bit of an eye on that sustainability piece of things too, and just making sure that that doesn't become a hot button issue for an industry that maybe is already sensitive to some of those sustainability concerns. So it's not there yet, but that part of me wonders, is that where the conversation is going to start going this year?
Yeah, it's a very, very relevant point. The actual impact of data centers and the use of power by AI. But I think what I'm hearing you saying, Sydney and Porrick, is that look, it's already out there, it's already embedded increasingly in what's being used, and there are very specific programs and platforms. Start, practice, take these prompts, those suggestions, refine how you prompt, how you ask the questions, and then see what's relevant for your business, and watch this space, which is changing very, very quickly. You gave me a great segue, Sydney, because you mentioned sustainability, and I'm actually confused by sustainability. I'm looking at the world, I'm looking at your presentation, and I'm actually seeing two diametrically nearly opposite approaches. I'm looking at the what you mentioned, rightly so, particularly being driven from Europe, legislative initiatives, and you mentioned UAE as well, about how sustainability is more core, and a sensitivity to the need to have sustainability embedded in your results and as part of your operating system. And yet I'm looking at the television yesterday, I'm seeing a new regime in the United States, which is removing itself from the Paris Agreement on climate. I'm looking at a phrase which is an emphasis on oil and fossil fuels being developed. So if I'm in Macau, what do I do? Which one do I follow? Which is the trend that's going to be the permanent reality? Porrick, do you want to start off there?
Yeah, I think unfortunately sustainability has become politicized, and in a way, the future of our planet is overarching. It's not to do with one political persuasion or another, and I think ultimately, from a business events perspective, we should be focused on doing the right thing, and the right thing is to change our businesses and make them more sustainable, change our meetings and our conferences and make them more sustainable. I think when we were in Macau, we've been there twice now over the last about 15 months, and we could see really, really good examples of sustainability as an element that was being taken seriously at all the levels, including in terms of how it actually impacts on a meeting and what that meeting looks like, and whether water is in a plastic bottle or whether it's served out of a jug. I feel at the moment, if you look at the United States, it has not embraced sustainability. In Asia, there is an embracing of sustainability. In Europe, there's a very strong embracing of sustainability, to the point where it actually is part of the regulatory environment as well, which means that it's kind of part of being a citizen in different European countries, means following different kind of regulations, particularly in terms of how you actually organize your rubbish or your trash. We don't see that to the same extent, particularly in the United States. But I think that the answer is clear from an ethical perspective, and it's that we need to take a lead. So often we have discussions with agencies and with clients where they say, well, look, our client doesn't care about sustainability. And, so therefore, it's not something that we need to do. But I think there's a stronger kind of ethical principle at stake here, which is, what do you believe in as a company yourself? What are your principles? What are your ethical standards? And in a way, I think there's an opportunity for individual businesses at whatever stage they're at on the spectrum of business events, for those individual businesses to actually stand up and take a lead. And irrespective of what a client is requiring you to do, you still maintain your core principles around running a sustainable company and running sustainable conferences and meetings.
Okay, it's a very clear answer. Sydney, would your opinion be aligned with Porrick's as regards the moral standpoint that needs to be taken, and also the legislative environment that's out there?
I think it's maybe even simpler than kind of looking at morals or ethics. I certainly agree it's just the right thing to do. But I think, being more sustainable, being more environmentally friendly is really just becoming a requirement. I don't think it's a choice. I think, yes, it has been politicized, and the idea of sustainability is framed as, yes, no, are we going to, are we not? But I think we have a lot of conversations, for example, with DMCs, I'd say, because DMCs, I think, are the ones where a lot of this work is going to fall on you if it's not falling on you already. We've had a couple of clients, for instance, who are having events in the summer in places that are increasingly hot. And it becomes your responsibility as the event organizer or as an event partner to think about how you're going to mitigate that, and how you're going to keep guests comfortable, and how you're going to communicate that conditions are difficult. So I think it's less of an issue of, is it the right thing to do? How do we build kind of client ethical support? But it's more just, the reality is that sustainability is creating real change in the world, and it's really on all of us as event professionals and as MICE professionals to figure out how we're going to help clients navigate that. So I think it's less of a, does it make business sense? But it's just here. You don't have a choice anymore as to whether you're going to be sustainable or not. You just have to.
And it certainly, I would have to say, is appearing as a feature in more RFPs for larger associations, because I think one of the realities of life in the association market in particular, and increasingly in the corporate, is their sense of responsibility to the destination that they go to and the impact their meeting has, and also the responsibility for the legacy that any meeting or any association meeting takes place, both in the short term and the long term. We've only really started our discussions and we have to end. So Porrick, I'm going to give you the final words. Would you like to wrap up there? Because we've got 2 minutes to go before we end on time, as we always do.
Yeah, well, look, thank you so much for your attention and your participation today. I hope the discussion was useful, that you're able to find kind of ways to actually implement some of the things that we've said into the work that you do. A big thank you in particular to the Macao University of Tourism, and to anybody who managed to follow this particular webinar from there. Hopefully we didn't speak too fast. Sometimes when we get onto the crest of our argument, we start going very fast. So apologies for that, but hopefully you can listen to the webinar back in recording afterwards, and get a kind of a slower version maybe in that way.
And maybe
so
use
once
some
again,
AI translation tools, right?
exactly. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Great suggestion, Sydney.
We could
Well
have done,
done.
we could have done that. There's a great one that we're using at a conference that we're part of quite soon, which is called Wordly, WORDLY. So that's another one to add to the list. It gives a kind of a simultaneous translation in as many languages as there are, I think, in the world, which is amazing. But thank you to Pat and thank you to Sydney for your wonderful presentation on the current kind of state of the trends in the world, and hopefully we'll all be in a better position to thrive in 25 as a result. And once again, thank you to our great friends in IPIM, to Gonzalo and to Elaine and Veronica and everybody else who might be listening. We look forward to seeing you all very soon again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Sydney. Thank you, Port. Goodbye.